welcome back. In this session, we'll be seeing what are React forms and some important information associated with it. So let's get straight into our sandbox. I hope you can see my screen now. So we have this basic sandbox of ours with one index.js file, an app.jsx file, and this simple React form with this, which if we try to open in a new window, you will be able to see that we have one hello in an h1 tag, an input field with this placeholder and a submit button. So up till the previous session, we have seen simple events like clicking off a button or hovering over it. But this time we'll be talking about some more complex events for in this particular case that arise from forms, from this React forms. Okay, so the way we saw that in the case of the button, let's just keep one sandbox for this particular one. So we saw that in the case of button, we had one method called onClick. Okay, and this method onClick, it corresponds to the clicking of a button, this particular one, and then by equaling it to some particular function, we'll be able to execute that function, whatever code we write inside that function, as soon as someone clicks on this button. Similarly, for the input field of ours, we have a method called onChange. So as the name suggests, this particular method states that as soon as for this particular case, showing an error as of now. Let me write another function here. Let's say this particular function we call handle change, like this, and we make this equals to this. So now if we see this onChange method that we have over this input field, it will say that if you change whatever text is in here, the value of this, which is initially nothing, okay, we just have a placeholder text that says what's your name, and as soon as we start writing inside this onChange method will work, it will trigger, and it will make a call to this particular function every time there's a change inside this input field. And remember, whenever you are experimenting or learning anything and you don't seem to know like where to proceed or something, so the thing that we can do is always check by console logging. So now you can see if I open this console and if I try to write something, you'll be able to see that this changed will come on the console. Okay, every time I'm writing anything, as you can see, with every consequent character, it's 9, now it's 10, it's 11. So with me writing every consequent character, this particular method will be called, and since I was console logging changed here, we were able to see that. Now another feature of this onChange method is that as soon as this particular method is triggered, it will send over an event to this corresponding function of ours. And now what this particular event is, as always, you can see it by console logging it. Okay, now let's press anything, and as you're able to see, we press something. So this particular event that we had, it has many properties, as you can see in here, but the most concern to us in this particular one is this target property. Okay, so as you can see, it is a very big let's say object with many properties, and a particular property consists of yet another property. So but we are right now concerned with this target property of this. So let's try to see what do we have inside this target property of our event. Now we pressed something, and you'll be able to see that whenever we do something, So in the target property, actually this entire input is getting passed on. All right. And what do we mean by this entire input getting there? Which means it means that whatever attributes that you have for this particular input, be it the type of this input, the placeholder of this input, or even the value of this input, which is not explicitly mentioned right now, but the value is something that contains whatever you are currently typing or whatever text is currently typed inside this input field. Okay. And how we can check it? By further using the dot operator and appending value over here. So now you'll see if I'm writing my name, for example. So if I write with me writing this, every subsequent time this onChange method will get triggered, and the value that we have of this particular input element, it gets updated to the final text that we have inside this input field. Okay. Similarly, as in the case of value, oops, let me copy this 2 times over. And for example, if I try to tap into the type of this input field and placeholder of this input field, you'll be able to see if I write another thing, the first thing that I'm seeing is the value, the type which is text, and the placeholder that we mentioned inside this input field of ours. So this is one thing. Let's say if someone asks us, okay, I want you to do one thing, and that thing is that whatever the user is typing inside this input field, okay, we want it to get appended in after this hello in the h1 tag of ours in real time, which means as I've typed this, whatever I'm typing inside this input field, it should get appended here. It should present itself as a heading in real time. And how can we do that? We know that it's very easy. First of all, we will have to make use of, as many of you might have suggested, the useState method. Okay, so I'm taking this variable called name, and I will be using the useState method. As you saw that as soon as I included it here, the importing of this particular method from React modules as a non-default, it actually came here automatically. And initially I want this name to be blank, and in order to pass it here as a reference or dynamically, I will be using these curly braces. And then okay, let's put this function inside this only, so that everything is on the same place. And now okay, let us put this above this. All right, so the next thing we want is that we want this name to get updated with whatever is being typed inside this input field. And we know that this set name function that we have, this will actually reset this name with whatever we pass here. And what do we pass here? The value that we had inside the target, which is the input element of the event that got sent over as soon as there was a change inside this input field. And now you will be able to see, as soon as I'm typing and whatever I type, that will automatically get appended in front of this hello on here. So this is one thing that I was able to achieve based on this particular event of onChange. So inside this, there's one more thing that you should always follow. Even though as of now we are not able to see any particular difference here, but the HTML elements that we have and the attributes of these HTML elements, they tend to maintain their own state, okay, a state of their own. And since we are referring to the value of this particular input field of ours, and we were making use of this in order to update the name variable of ours. So we should make this value equals to the name as well, because the name here, it is getting bind to this value attribute of this input element. And since we have these two things pointing to the same this particular content inside this input field, so in order to have a single source of truth, which means either of them, if I'm referring to value in here and if I'm referring to the name, which is also equals to the value attribute of this element of ours, in order for both of them to be synchronized, you should always remember to always explicitly mention this for all your attributes of these HTML elements, which tend to maintain their own state. You can head over to this React documentation, and this particular phenomena, as you can see, in which we are actually making use, or let's say controlling the attributes of these HTML elements, this is called controlled components. Okay, so even here, as you can see, that form components, form elements such as this, they maintain their own state, and it updated on the base of a user input in React. Okay, in here you can see an input form element whose value is controlled by React. In this way is called a controlled component. You can go through this and give it a read, and don't worry about this usage of this class here instead of our functional components. They have not updated it, or even some people prefer to use this class notation, but we will be using the functional one. You will just try to get the basic gist out of this, and you'll be able to understand what this particular thing is. Okay, so the next thing is, let's say right now we have one particular, let's say, functionality appended with this particular form of ours, and it is that whatever we are writing here, it gets appended in front of this hello. But this is actually not something that you will want your website to do. So now what I want to do is, I want to say that, okay, whatever I'm writing inside this input field of mine, it should get appended in front of this heading only if I click this button of mine. Okay, which means if I click this particular button, then it should start coming here. Okay, so we know that in this particular thing of ours, we have a button element here, and the concerned method in this particular case will be the onClick one, because we are trying to do something based on a particular event, and that event is the clicking of this button. So let's say I create a function called handle click, and then in here we mention this as handle click in here, and inside this handle click of ours, first of all, what we ought to do is, now instead of this name, we'll be taking another variable. Let's call our variable header, and let's call this particular function set header. And now instead of name here, we want this header variable to pop up here as soon as we click this particular button. So the last thing that we need to do is, inside this particular function that will get triggered on the clicking of this button, we will use the set header method, and we'll make it equals to name variable of ours, which is actually containing the live text that we have inside this input field. So whatever text you have before you click this particular button, that particular text will get equal to this header variable of ours, and then this name will be equal to this header variable, and then this header variable of ours will get appended to in front of this header of mine. Okay, so the expectation is, as soon as I click this particular button, this should come in front of us. Okay, so let's see. Okay, now you saw that using this we were able to achieve this particular thing. Okay, let me hit refresh once and hit save in here. Let's try to do it again. Okay, it is coming here. So I want to show you one another property that is not currently being demonstrated in here, which says that actually the default behavior of React forms of ours, it is that as soon as you click this button of yours, maybe if some of you is trying to achieve this in your local environment, you might be able to see that as soon as you click this particular button, I think with the update of the new version of React, they have actually addressed this particular issue. So initially, previously what used to happen was, as soon as we click this particular button, this header right now that you have inside this input field, it used to come here and then quickly vanish from here, because the default behavior of a form is that okay, sorry, that's one more thing. Let's keep it up till here. Next thing that I want to show you is that whenever we are using a React form, so what I was trying to tell you, it will come now. So whenever we are using these inputs and buttons and these kind of stuff that will make up a particular form, what we tend to do is we tend to put them inside a form element. All right, so what do? We will wrap it inside a form, both of them like this. All right, so this is the basic usual implementation in which we put the input and button elements inside our HTML component, HTML form component. All right, and whenever you are putting a particular button inside a form element, so since you might have let's say many buttons or multiple buttons, you can also explicitly mention that this button of mine is of type submit. So whenever I click this particular button, this form should acknowledge that okay, the pressing of this particular button actually signifies that the user is trying to submitting something. Okay, but as of now, since we have only one button in here, we will not require it. Okay, so let me demonstrate that thing now. So right now I'm writing this here, and on the click of this particular button, this comes here as you see, and then this form refreshes and the name is gone. Okay, let me show you once again. I click this particular button, it came here and the form refreshed, and then we are back to the initial state. So actually I forgot to wrap this inside this form element, and this particular behavior that you are seeing right now, this is actually the default behavior of a form. Whenever you go to a particular website, the default behavior of a form is that they refresh to submit, make a post request, make a get request, and then refresh the page, because in order to let's say make room for another entry or another user to type out and hit submit. So while submitting the form, if this particular button is of type submit, as you can see here, that means if we have a button which is of type submit, then you'll be able to make use of a method called onSubmit. And this particular method that we have onSubmit, this is actually binded to the form element, and it states that if a particular button is clicked that is of type submit, which means whatever entries you have inside your form, the user want to submit that. So we can make use of this particular method of ours. And then in here, now what we can do is instead of having this handle click function inside onClick, I can remove this from here, and then this handle click can be addressed by onSubmit. Let me show you what I mean by this. If I hit submit now, it came here, and again it vanished. The form refreshed. So the problem is still there. It is yet not addressed. But now, what we can change or what we can modify by the use of this onSubmit is similar to the onChange method of input element. This onSubmit sends an event to the function that gets called as soon as it is triggered. So this particular event, what we can do for this is, you can write something called event dot prevent default. Okay, so what this particular line means is that the event that we had on clicking the submit button, which means the onSubmit event, then this particular function is called, and whatever logic you want to write inside this, it is done. And at the end of this particular function, if you write this particular code, that event.prevent default, it will say that whatever next behavior that was supposed to come, it will prevent that particular behavior. And in our case, the by default behavior that was troubling us with regards to this form element was the refreshing of this form that was occurring without our consent. Okay, we wanted the name to stay here, but it was refreshing anyway. So now with the addition of this prevent default method from this event of ours, now if I try to write my name and click on this button, you'll be able to see that this name got appended, but the default behavior of this form getting refreshed, it is now prevented by the use of this onSubmit method and this event dot prevent default. So this is how we can make use. You saw that how we made use of this handle change. Now this onChange method that we have inside an input element that will make you get hold of the current text that lies inside the input field, the make use of this handle click that we already saw, and finally, whenever we are working with React forms, which you ultimately will when you will be dealing with like real-time websites and websites that actually have users using them, so that will be a lot of React forms in there, and which with much more content inside them rather than these two entries. And for in that particular case, when someone is making let's say a GET request or a POST request or anything that includes the submit button being clicked and this onSubmit method being called, then always remember to make use of this prevent default functionality in order to avoid whatever data you want to actually display over your component here. You can prevent it from getting vanished. All right, so that was all for React forms from my side. I hope you were able to understand all the functionalities we saw. Make sure to check out that React documentation which talks about control component. And for this particular session, that will be all from my end. I'll see you in the next one.